Imagine this, deep under the ocean, off Sri Lanka. A super stealthy American submarine, a Los Angeles class, was doing what it does best, hunting, you know? An Iranian warship, the Iris Dina, was out there, pinging its sonar, zigzagging, totally searching for asterisk something asterisk. Guess what was asterisk really asterisk trailing it? Our guys. Soon, the sub's captain was about to get an order, a crazy serious one, that hadn't been given since World War II. Absolutely wild, don't you think? Trying to hunt asterisk this asterisk ship, forget about it. The Dina was seriously blasting the ocean with active sonar, her radar sweeping everywhere. Here's the really genius part, every few minutes, the captain would randomly swing the ship around. This totally messed with the submarine's aim. Right, it literally reset their targeting solution before they could even get a lock. Submarines usually. Imagine trying to find a friend's house with just a compass on your phone. You know the direction, right? But you'd have no idea if it's super close or miles away. That's how tricky it can be. This fire control tech was totally focused on his display, watching a target's bearing line slowly creep across. Seriously, that tiny movement was everything. By tracking how it shifted over minutes, feeding it into smart algorithms, he could nail down its exact distance, speed, and course. Pretty clever, you know? Imagine this pure nightmare. A green line on his screen, right? It's trying to lock onto a target, kinda like a blurry photo slowly focusing, but nope. This Iranian captain just keeps messing it up, shaking the camera every time it's asterisk almost asterisk sharp. The Dina zigs and poof. All that progress instantly vanishes. The poor tech has to restart completely, only for the captain to pull another random turn in 90 seconds. Absolutely maddening, you know? Its engine while somebody keeps changing lanes. That was the fire control team's morning. The Iranian captain had spent weeks at Milan 2026, multinational naval exercises with the Indian Navy, practicing exactly these anti-submarine procedures. The Americans had watched. Now, one of those submarines was trailing the Dina like a patient ghost, and the captain's Milan training was the only card he had left to play. But that wasn't what worried the crew. What worried them was sitting on the Dina's aft flight deck. The SH-3 Sea King anti-submarine warfare helicopter you see here carried a low-frequency dipping sonar purpose-built to do one thing: find submarines where whole sonar can't reach. Think of it this way. The Dina's whole sonar was shouting into the ocean from the surface and hoping for an echo. The dipping sonar drops a microphone directly into the submarine's living room. The Sea King hovers, lowers a transducer on a cable straight through the thermal layer, and pings from the same acoustic environment the submarine is hiding in. That thermal shield, keeping the sub invisible, stops working the instant that transducer microphone splashes below it. It's the acoustic equivalent of hiding behind a curtain while someone walks around to your side of the room. And the Dina's helicopter crew knew how to use it. One competent helicopter crew could leapfrog across the ocean, sanitizing the search box the sub was sitting in the middle of faster than a surface ship could cover the same ground in a full day. 400 feet down, you can't see a thing topside. You listen. A helicopter spooling up has a sound signature. Turbine wind rotor engagement. The sharp transient of liftoff. The sonar team strained to hear any of it through the ambient noise. Nothing so far. But the absence of sound through the thermocline. Dozens of merchant ships through the snapping shrimp colonies crackling on the continental shelf. That absence guaranteed nothing. If the Sea King launched while the sub closed the range, the Americans had two options. Shoot immediately before the helicopter establishes a search pattern, or go deep and lose the window entirely. There was no middle ground. For now, the thermocline was doing its job. A boundary where warm surface water meets cooler deep water, bending sound the way a prism bends light. The Dina's pings hit that boundary and refracted upward, curving away from the submarine, painting an empty ocean on the Iranian sonar screens. 400 feet down, the sub was a hole in the water. Except the thermocline isn't a wall, it's a lens. And lenses have quirks. The sonar chief watched one of those quirks threaten to expose him. Sound traveling through deep water doesn't just disappear. It bends downward, strikes density boundaries, and arcs back toward the surface at roughly 30 nautical mile intervals. Convergence zones, places where a ping should have petered out 50 miles ago. Rive's gift wrapped on a sonar screen. One lucky geometry from the Dina. One ping catching the right arc at the right angle. And the Iranian operator paints a contact he can't explain sitting exactly where the submarine is. Worse, the layer was thinning. The technicians had been dropping expendable bathythermographs to measure the water around them. 3 clocks were now running against them. The thermal layer was thinning by the hour. Every bathythermograph reading came back warmer than the last, and the sonar chief estimated 6 to 8 hours before the layer degraded past reliable concealment. The Dina was streaming, roughly parallel to the Sri Lankan coast at 15 knots. At current course and speed, she crossed the 12 nautical mile territorial limit in approximately 40 minutes. And once she did, the shot evaporated under international law. And on the flight deck, the Sea King sat fueled, armed, and one captain's order away from the turning submarine's hiding spot into an open auditorium. Any one of those clocks running out would end the mission. All three were ticking simultaneously. So at 0 for 1 with the layer thinning, the helicopter a coin flip from launching and the fire control team wrestling a zigzagging target through an ocean full of noise. The sub needed something it couldn't get from down here. The execute authorization from CENTCOM couldn't reach operating depth. ELF radio extremely low frequency. The only signal that penetrates deep water carries almost zero bandwidth. Think of it as the world's most expensive text message. And the only thing it can say is call me enough to tell the sub to come shallow. Not enough to transmit a targeting authorization for what comes next. To get the order, they had to come to periscope depth. That meant rising from the thermal layer that had been keeping them hidden, entering the water column, where the Dina's hull sonar worked best, pushing a communications mast above the waterline and into an ASR-3D radar's detection envelope that was scanning for exactly the kind of small transient contact a periscope mast creates. A thin metal tube barely above the surface, appearing for seconds. One full sweep of the ASR at the wrong moment, and an Iranian radar operator sitting at his screen in a wartime posture gets the return he's been praying he wouldn't see. But the crew had a trick for that. A South Korean LNG tanker to 100,000 tons of liquefied natural gas was plowing through the corridor 5 meters to the southeast, throwing a massive radar return on every scope within 50 miles. The sub's navigator had been tracking her for the past hour, waiting for the geometry to align. If the sub came to periscope depth along the exact line of bearing between the tanker and the Dina, the mast would sit in the tanker's radar shadow. Any return the ASR painted would look like a ghost. A side lobe reflection from the 100,000 tons of steel, not a submarine. It's the radar equivalent of sneaking across a room by staying directly behind someone bigger than you. If the person watching only sees one silhouette, they'll never know there were two. The Iranian radar operator would see it, check the bearing, see the tanker sitting right behind it, and dismiss it as clutter. Submarine captains have been hiding behind merchant ships since the Cold War. Tonight, a South Korean gas tanker was going to earn the most thankless assist in naval history without ever knowing it. At 0 for 8, the geometry lined up. The officer of the deck called the ascent. The sub rose through the thermocline. Flow noise building on the hull. The thermal shield peeling away. The sonar picture degrading as ambient surface noise flooded in 0.3 days of invisibility traded for a few seconds with a mast above the waterline, tucked behind a merchant ship's radar shadow. The communications mast broke the surface. Satellite link locked. Message traffic streamed down. Authorization confirmed. The sub dove back beneath the layer. The thermocline closed over them like a door. On the fire control displays, the Dina's bearing ticked eastward, still zigzagging, still pinging. But now the geography was squeezing them. At 0 for 5-1, the Dina's course tracked parallel to the Sri Lankan coast, 20 nautical miles offshore. The 12 nautical mile territorial limits sitting 8 miles to the north. International law made those waters untouchable. If the Iranian captain got spooked and turned toward shore, the shot evaporated, and a captain watching his navy get smacked down like they did had every reason to hug the coast. His crew would rather be interned by Colombo than torpedoed by something they couldn't see. Every minute the sub waited, the Dina streamed closer to the line where a single course change would carry her inside the sanctuary. One more constraint was still pressing in from behind. The sub was still streaming the towed array. Hundreds of feet of sensor cable trailing behind the boat, her sharpest ear. But the moment that torpedo launched, if the sub needed to maneuver hard, that array became a leash. You can't retrieve it quickly. Aggressive turns risk tangling the cable or snapping it clean off. The boat's best sensor was about to become its biggest problem at the worst possible moment. At 0 for 5-3, the fire control team locked the solution. The weapons officer programmed the Mark 48 ADC cap in tube 1. The captain gave the order, and what happened next was the loudest thing the sub would do all day in an ocean where the Dina was listening for exactly that sound. The torpedo tube flooded. Seawater rushed in to equalize with external pressure. A sharp acoustic transient that a trained sonar operator recognizes the way a parent recognizes their child crying in a crowded room. Unmistakable. The crew bet everything on the thermocline, the shipping noise, and a million snapping shrimp drowning out one submarine's worst moment. If the Dina sonar team caught that transient through the noise, the next 60 seconds would go very differently. The Mach 48 dropped from the tube, 21 in diameter, 3,500 pounds of guided WUPAS running on auto fuel to a monopropellant that carries its own oxidizer, needs no air intake, and produces no exhaust bubbles rising to betray the shot. The engine drove a pump, jet propulsor instead of a traditional screw, no cavitation trail, no white line on the surface. The torpedoes that sank ships in 1945 drew a visible streak straight back to the submarine that fired them. A neon arrow saying, "Shoot here." The Mark 48 left nothing. The only signature was acoustic. Engine hum swallowed by the ambient roar of one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. A whisper in a stadium. A wire spooled out behind the weapon, hair thin, connecting the torpedo to the fire control technician's console. Through that wire, the operator could steer the weapon around obstacles, adjust for target maneuvers, override the seeker if countermeasures confused it. Think of it as driving a car by holding a single thread taped to the steering wheel from 7 miles away, blindfolded, while someone else decides whether to cut the thread. The trade-off. The sub was now chained in place, locked on course and depth, unable to maneuver, unable to run. Nothing that might stress or snap that thread. If the wire broke, the torpedo went autonomous. Still dangerous, but nobody would be driving. And there were reasons somebody might need to drive. At transit speed, the Mark 48 was deaf. Flow noise over the sonar drone drowned the ocean out completely. The fire control technician steered blind through the wire, watching guidance data scroll across his display, threading a weapon doing 55 knots through a shipping lane, where a wrong turn put a warhead into a merchant vessel 7 nautical miles to the Dina and shrinking. If she made an unexpected turn toward those Sri Lankan territorial waters to the north, the technician had seconds to bend the torpedo's track through a wire thinner than a pencil to a weapon that couldn't see where it was going. At 5 miles, the Dina zigzagged. The bearing shifted on the fire control display. The technician adjusted the torpedo's gyro course through the wire, bending the intercept geometry to match the new heading. Every correction ate more wire. Every degree of turn lowered the margin between guided weapon and expensive noisemaker point for meters. The continental shelf off Gale, Sri Lanka drops away into deep Indian Ocean water. The depth gradient squeezed the torpedo's performance envelope from every direction. Too shallow and the weapon broaches the surface. Too deep and the runtime stretches, handing the Dina extra seconds to turn or make for good water. The 3-dimensional box the navigator had been managing shrank with every mile. 3 miles, the Dina pinged again, the sonar pulse radiating outward through the water, passing over the torpedo like a searchlight sweeping past a burglar. The Mark 48 torpedo was small enough and fast enough that the return, if there was one, would look like biologics in the Dina sonar screen. Probably the word submarine crews learned to live with. 2 miles, the Mark 48 slowed, flow noise dropped, and the torpedo woke up. The onboard sonar, a 2D phased array seeker electronically steered, started painting the water ahead. Active pinging, high frequency. A 500-ton frigate pushing 15 knots of displaced water through the Indian Ocean is not a subtle target. The seeker locked the Dina almost instantly. Terminal acquisition. The weapon accelerated for the final run. Now the Dina heard it. Somewhere on that ship, a sonar operator caught what every sailor in every Navy prays he never hears. Active pinging, closing fast, bearing consistent. Bearing consistent means it's not passing by. He hit the alarm. The bridge heard it. The captain heard it. 15 seconds separated that moment from impact. 15 seconds, the Dina carried acoustic decoys, expendable noise makers designed to seduce torpedo seekers away from the real hull. Getting them in the water meant recognizing the threat, authorizing countermeasures, and throwing them over the side. That sequence takes a trained crew on a good day longer than 15 seconds. A hard turn. A 1,500-ton frigate 15 knots needs hundreds of meters to come about. She didn't have hundreds of meters. The triple 324mm torpedo launchers on the aft deck could reach 30 kilometers. But firing requires okay, picture this, a submarine, just chilling for 100 feet deep. Totally invisible and absolutely untouchable, right? Then, boom! It hears a torpedo, but has no clue where it's coming from. Crazy, isn't it? Even if decoys worked, a huge if, a technician was ready to literally take over that torpedo. They'd steer it manually, with a wire, past all the chaos, right onto that massive steel target. That wire! It was everything. So crucial. You won't believe this, but the Mark 48 torpedo didn't hit the ship. It zipped right underneath asterisk. You know, its clever sensors found the ship's spine above. Boom, it perfectly detonated, creating this massive gas bubble that shot up with insane force, literally lifting the whole ship. Crazy, right? Picture this, a 1,500-ton ship, right? It's literally being bent in half by this insane column of superheated gas bursting up from beneath it. For a split second, that massive vessel just hung there, nothing supporting it. Can you even imagine that? Then, just like that, the gas bubble collapsed, the stern absolutely plummeted, and the keel totally snapped. Later footage showed the bow shooting skyward as the back section dragged everything else down. Truly unbelievable. Imagine this, a submarine just completely folded and swallowed by the Indian Ocean. Seriously chilling, right? Around 5 a.m., a distress call went out. But when rescue teams arrived, they found nothing but oil slicks, debris, and empty life rafts. Absolutely heartbreaking, you know, the sub totally vanished. No periscope, no signal, zero trace. It's like the ocean just closed over the spot where it had been, the reactor still humming. Spooky, don't you think? Like she was never there. Love this. Seriously, you've got to see our epic Fury launch next. See ya.